there, and welcome to our show, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing. I'm best-selling author Bianca, and I'm joined by Cece Lira of Wendy Sherman Associates and Carly Waters of PS Literary. Hey everyone, today's guest is the author of the novels Asking for a Friend, Waiting for a Star to Fall, and Mitzi Bites, and editor of The M Word, Conversations About Motherhood, a National Magazine Award-nominated essayist and editor of Canadian books website 49thshelf.com. She writes about books and read at her longtime blog, Pickle Me This. She lives in Toronto with her family. It's my pleasure to welcome back Kerry Clare. Kerry, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back.
It's wonderful to speak to you because Kerry, for those of you who are listening, is one of my favorite literary citizens. You cannot go to a book launch, a book signing, a library event without Kerry being there in support of other authors. So Kerry, thank you for setting such a good example for the rest of us.
I don't know, you do the same, so that's really nice to hear. Thank you.
Alrighty, so let's go into the book itself. I'm going to read a synopsis. I'm holding up the book. For those of you who aren't watching on YouTube, the book is called Definitely Thriving. My copy is really battered, which is always a good sign because when I love a book, I live inside of this book. So generally when the book looks really pristine, it's like, yeah, but when it looks like shit, you know, I really enjoyed it. So here we go. Let me read the flap copy for you. After accidentally on purpose exploding her listless marriage by being discovered in bed with the next door neighbors, Clemence Lathbury returns to her hometown, resolved to build a life for herself that is good and substantial, to become the kind of sensible woman who won't be distracted by frippery and romance. It's supposed to be eat, pray, love without the love part. But no woman is an island, and soon Clemence finds herself embroiled in neighborhood drama, beginning a crusade at the local bookshop, becoming adopted by a well-groomed one-eyed cat, and being forced to admit her attraction to two very different men, each a romantic lead in his own right. But how to choose? And never mind the complications of her quirky family. A novel about friendship, community, and church jumble sales. Definitely Thriving is a celebration of people who are perfectly imperfect and all the love and support that's required for one woman to make it on her own. So there we go. All right, let us dive in because I have a ton of questions for you. And I want to make sure we get to most of them. I am always fascinated by the genesis of the idea for a book, because to me it's like what Julia Roberts said in Pretty Woman, that it can be a slippery little sucker. In terms of, you listed a whole bunch of things in your acknowledgements, and I'd like to break them down. So you spoke about how the novels of Barbara Pym were inspired for Clemence. Can you speak a bit about that?
Yeah, so I love Barbara Pym. Are you familiar with Barbara Pym, Bianca?
No, so
Have you
now
read her
it's somebody
books?
that I've had to add to my to-be-read list.
Oh, lucky you, though. So yeah, she's a mid-century British novelist. She writes about spinsters, pretty much. She never married. Her biography came out a few years ago. It's wonderful. She had bizarre relationships. She had like strange fixations on really inappropriate men. I don't really know what was going on beneath the surface, but her personal life was quirky and bizarre. And so the characters in her books have arrangements that are just as unconventional, and they're just so interesting. She has a really subtle touch. Sometimes it can seem like not a lot's happening in her books. She writes about communities. She writes about little English villages, London parish church communities, and then also workplaces. And a lot of it was informed by her own biography, the settings, not necessarily the stories, although some of them. And they're just about really mundane things. I mean that as such a compliment. It's the stuff of this world. It's the little details. It's like how annoying it is when someone steals your coffee in the office, or how you want to drink out of that specific mug. She writes about communities and how difficult communities are and how weird and irritating people are. That's a story that I think she never ran out of material for. And I wanted to write a modern day Barbara Pym heroine, and so that's what I attempted to do in this book.
You've sold me on her because I'm actually quite a misanthropist. So people think I really like other people, but I really am a misanthropist. So which of her books do you recommend I start with?
Excellent Women is my favorite of her books. And it's sort of the one that, is the best gateway. And that's about a woman in post-war London who moves into this flat and she doesn't have her own bathroom. She has to share a bathroom with this crazy family that lives a couple that moves into the same unit. And a lot of her books are about other people living in close proximity to us and about how uncomfortable that could be, but also interesting. People are fascinating. And Barbara Pym died in 1980, so she never got to see the internet. But in her own life and in her books, her characters are so nosy and they're always going to the library to look up characters in directories because they just want to know everything. They want data. And so that also is something that's really resonant for me. I mean, other people are irritating, but they're also fascinating. And we always want to figure them out. And so that's a thread in her book as well.
Yeah, hell is other people, but man, we'd be lost without them. Okay, so you also wrote about how the notion of artfully refusing the question of how to be a woman comes from Rebecca Solnit's essay, The Mother of All Questions.
Yes, so I love Rebecca Solnit's books, and she's published these little volumes by Haymarket Press, and that's what The Mother of All Questions was. And I just love the idea of refusing the question of how to be a woman. And that specific essay is about motherhood. And the conversation about whether or not to have children is something that gets hashed out all the time. And I have to say, I very rarely see anything new in it, like it's just, it depends on where the person having that conversation is at, and we all have different points of view, but there's something kind of reactionary about it no matter where you're falling. And Rebecca Solnit just shuts the whole thing down, and she's just refusing those questions and making her own narrative, and I found that really refreshing. And so I wanted to write about a character who's also refusing the question of how to be a woman. And I have children. I've been married for 20 years. I've had kind of a very conventional trajectory in some ways. But I can relate to a character like Clemence, who just throws out the baby and the bathwater. She never has a baby. She doesn't throw out a baby, but you know what I mean? She's not concerned with that. And I kind of relate to that. I always knew I wanted to have children. And I feel like that certainty gives me a commonality with people who always knew they didn't. Like, we know our own souls. And so I was able to relate to Clemence's point of view quite easily. That way, I know what it's like to know what we want and who we are. And even though her choice is different than the one that I've made, like that beautiful certainty about certain things is really, it's maybe the only stability that she has, because as the cover shows, her whole life's been turned upside down, but there are some things she knows for sure.
Yeah. So Cece always says on the podcast that writing is seduction, and that you need to surprise your reader. They need to expect something and then they get something completely different. Have you got your book? Are you able to read that excerpt? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me tell you, it's from 6 weeks have passed from the bottom of page 4 to She Hoped, which is at the bottom of page 5. If you can read that for us, please.
Absolutely. 6 weeks have passed since Clemence's marriage exploded, or more accurately, since Clemence exploded her marriage, accidentally on purpose, by being discovered by her husband Toad in bed with Larry and Lisa, the couple next door, with a fondness for tanning beds and leopard print. And afterward, a normal person, a good person, would have been able to explain to Toad that it had been a mistake, a one-time thing, except that it had been happening for months. Clemence had even orchestrated Toad's discovery, timing it right down to the minute after she knew she'd hear his key in the door. A good person, afterward, would also have been able to promise her husband, "It's not you, it's me," to tell him that she'd just been looking for something different, something to spice up their lukewarm love life. Except Toad was the problem in its entirety. Clemence hadn't even liked being in bed with Larry and Lisa, which in its physicality was basically overwhelming and confusing, like having sex with an octopus, but having sex with Toad was so much worse. And maybe she'd always known. This is the part she feels guiltiest about. Clemence still remembers the first time she'd gone out with Toad, walking down the street, arm in arm, listening to his grating voice and thinking, at some point I'm going to have to find a way to get out of this. But she never did, because it was easier not to, because their bodies fit, because Toad was tall enough for her to lay her head against his chest when he wrapped his arms around her, and she'd listen to his heartbeat, her fondness for its solid consistency more than making up for the fact that he never made hers leap at all. Or so she thought. She hoped.
That made me laugh so hard, actually, to read it again. It was just, this whole book is just hilarious, Kerry, but there were certain spots that I was just highlighting. So, in terms of surprising the reader, we're so used to these narratives of a husband blowing up a marriage and the wife is the hard done by party and then she has to pick up the pieces of her life and put it all together, that this comes as such a surprise. Not only that she's the one who's been sleeping with this couple, but she doesn't really enjoy sleeping with this couple, but that she also orchestrated her husband's arrival so that he could see this, so that the marriage could blow up. So is this something that you had seen the scene playing out as all along? Was it something that you planned it that way specifically? Or is this something that was one of the things that perhaps surprised you about your own character?
I think it did surprise me. So I wrote this book in pretty much the order that it appears. And I began with Clemence's home. She moves into this new apartment that she expects to be like a cell. And she expects to kind of pay a penance for this error that she's made, that she orchestrated. And it turns out to be a beautiful, light filled room. And that's where the story began for me. And I went from there. And I was really under the influence of Katherine Heine while I was writing this book. I love Katherine Heine's novels and short stories. And what she taught me is that anything is possible in fiction. And that's why her husband is called Toad in my book. Anything is possible. People can be called Toad, and you don't even need to explain it. And the world is like that. Like if you've ever walked down the street and looked around, like there are some bizarre characters walking about, and some even banal bizarre characters, which is what Toad is. And so I just was like, you know what? Anything can happen. And so as I wrote, like, yeah, plenty of things surprised me. And that was one. And like, why not do something a little bit over the top? She's exiting this marriage. And so, yeah, she orchestrates a really dramatic exit.
It was excellent and it was surprising. So again, for our listeners, set something up, have the reader expecting something and then completely subvert their expectations, and this is what happens. And it happens on page 4. So okay, whatever I'm expecting from this novel, I am going to be getting a lot of different things from what I'm expecting. And that is what Kerry does so brilliantly in her writing. So something I want to talk about as well is we're hearing all the time now these days, hooks, hooks, hooks. In query letters, there has to be a big hook. This meets that, it's like an elevator pitch in a few seconds. And you look at the back of your novel and pretty much it says, a novel of friendship, community, and church jumble sales.
That's the biggest hook of all. It's the huge plot line. I think this is going to be next. Church jumble sale novels.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm not
so
very
you
good at
go,
hooks.
okay, so you're going, okay, this is not like a huge hook, although there are crochet needles and there's knitting in jumble sales, but quiet by all accounts, but also not quiet because life is not quiet. Life happens in those moments, like you say, where some bastard steals your coffee mug at work and you just want to beat the crap out of him with it. And life happens when you run out of toilet paper and there's no one there to scream to get the toilet paper.
What
Life
a
is not
nightmare.
always right. It's not always these big plot. Dun, 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 dun. So can we speak a bit about this? Because you do it so incredibly well that your novels never feel quiet. They feel loud. How do you do that?
It's the only way I know how to write. I've tried to write novels that are a little bit more conventional. Like this novel was my attempt to write a romantic comedy, but then she starts like masturbating on page 55 because I'm incapable of following the way we're supposed to do these things. I don't know. It's the only way I know how to do it.
I was waiting for you to say it because I'm incapable of not masturbating, but you took it somewhere else. So,
I don't
okay,
know.
this interview's already gone off the rails. Carry on.
So yeah, it's the only way I know how to do it. And it's hard to sell novels like this, and it's hard to market them. I've had my previous books be marketed as something a little bit more packaged and conventional, and then people read them and they're like, "What is this? 1 star on Goodreads." So that's not the best, but I am very happy with having found a home for this book at House of Anansi Press. And I feel like they've done a nice job of dressing up my weird, quiet-ish novel as exactly what it is. which I appreciate so much because you don't want to sell a reader. I mean, we want to surprise our reader, as you say, but you don't want a reader to be thinking they're getting something really formulaic, and then there's Toad and the octopus sex on page 4. I mean, it's not going to end well for anybody. So it is the only way I know how to write, but I'm grateful that I have had editors and my agents sort of see the goodness in that, and readers as well, like you. I don't know. I just think that sometimes we get a lot of advice about how to write, but we have to be true to our real voices and write the stories we are meant to write. Although I will say that the threesome with the next door neighbors is like kind of like a hook. It's happening on page 4, but it's on the back of the book. And all along, people have said you need to write books with hooks, and I haven't really. And this is the first one that sort of has that. And I have noticed that has caught people attention. There is something to hooks after all. I mean, maybe they're right. So this is my attempt.
What you've said about packaging is so important, because we as writers, what we have control over is writing the book of that we want to write, telling the story we want to tell. But then we hand it over to our publisher, and then it becomes a product that has to be sold. And it's so frustrating, like you say, when the book is marketed as something that it's not, and then the reader feels cheated. And like my last book was a murder mystery, but it also had fantasy in it. And so many readers were pissed off about this magical family. Again, 1-star reviews. They were like, I was expecting a closed room murder mystery. I was not expecting magic. And you're just like, it actually was there. It did say a magical family, but you're just probably not reading it properly. But it should be put front and center what this book is, because it will find its readers who don't want regular plot lines, who don't want conventional characters, who are looking for this kind of character who reminds us why we're alive, the quirkiness of being alive. And I think it's wonderful that your publisher has done that for you.
I have, and I'm really happy with my publicity team. Because it's hard to market books that don't fit into the conventional boxes. And I really feel grateful to be working with a team who have been kind of creative about situating the book in a slightly different way and letting it shine. But yeah, it's tough.
And I must warn you, people get very upset about masturbation scenes, but maybe it's just because my masturbation scene was an 80-year-old woman. In The Witches of Moonshine Manor, people lost their minds. People were like, I've stopped reading this book because that's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. And I'm like, listen, if I could be 80 and not have such bad arthritis that I could actually be masturbating, I think that's a great thing. Yeah. I mean,
I don't know what those readers are thinking.
Yeah, so come back to me and let me know, because maybe it's just an ageist thing. Maybe they don't mind Clemens masturbating because she's not 80. Let me know.
That's terrible, but yeah, everyone.
There was an article that was written for our Substack, and it was a term that I've never heard before, which was very interesting. It actually wasn't an article. It's a video by Danielle Gerard, who wrote the book Pinky Swear, and she discusses characterization, the deep marriage between plot and character. And she uses examples from Normal People, The Goldfinch, Gone Girl, A Little Life, The Road, and Never Let Me Go, to show why the most powerful stories unfold the way they do because of who the characters are, not what the author wants or needs to happen. And this feels like this sums up your books. Have you heard that term?
I never
Characterization.
Have. No. But is it cleric?
So it's Plarac. Is it characterization?
I see.
Am I pronouncing it wrong?
I don't know, but I understand. Okay. No, that is a term to something that I know so fundamentally, but I didn't know there was a word for it. So
yeah, the marriage between plot and character, because so much of who Clemens is drives this plot. It's not the other way around. It's not Kerry decided on a plot and popped Clemens in, and there we go. Clemens had to run through the obstacle course of this.
Well, and sometimes too, I read books that are in development by authors who also don't quite know what to do with their author. You can sense that they're kind of trying to occupy them, keep them busy. Clemens, I really had her own momentum. She wasn't doing anything that was especially monumental beyond her threesome with the next door neighbors,
and climbing into cupboards with weird men.
Well, yes. Okay. Yeah. but she knew she just was very directed. And so I identify with that term a lot. I almost think about like comics with little dotted lines with people wandering around a neighborhood, and that's I could draw the map for this book. And so yeah, her character is the plot. And if she wasn't someone who was artfully resisting questions about how to be a woman and just doing her own thing, a lot less would happen in the book. That is the plot.
Yeah, but also, isn't it insane, Kerry, that we're in 2026 and we're still having to defend our choices as women? We're still having to write books like this in which a woman has to say, no, I don't want this. And this is kind of what I want. And if I want this, then I'm seen as the weirdo or as the
You know what
outlier.
though?
That's a
Like
part.
what I like about the novel is that she's not defending it. Like that just it goes without saying, because I've read that book before when someone's making a case for their life choices. She's made that case. And so she's not making a case for that now. She is just living her life on her own terms. And I think that is fresh and interesting, and I hope that appeals to readers.
No, definitely. My point is that we need the counter to that
Yeah.
story, that we need a book like Definitely Thriving to counterbalance all those other stories. It's,
Yeah.
and it's just so refreshing. It's like a real palate cleanser. Okay, so your launch. Unfortunately, we cannot advertise your launch because this is airing after your launch.
Okay.
But those of you who follow on the Substack will see that we are advertising Kerry's launch there. And we are hoping after the fact that a lot of the Tease Not Your community will be there for the launch, because we love coming together and celebrating the literary community, and we love seeing each other. Now, you are having your launch at a special 25th anniversary showing of Bridget Jones's Diary. And something you've written there is all the love and support that's required for one woman to make it on her own. We see women making it on her own, and we forget about the love and the community support that it takes a village almost for a woman to be able to make it on her own.
So Clemence is, she's trying to live a sensible life. And that's a Barbara Pym heroine. They were the excellent women in the church who made everything happen, who did all the labor that made the world turn. And she resolves to become a woman like that instead of somebody who's in bed with the next door neighbors. And she thinks that if she doesn't engage with other people, if this woman remains an island, her life will be sensible and straightforward. And it turns out that that is just not possible. And other people keep creeping into her purview. And some of them are very attractive men, and some of them are less attractive, but somehow still oddly appealing men. And yeah, she just can't get away from community and connection. And so that's really fundamental to the book. And, I thought I was writing against Bridget Jones when I was writing this. There's a line where she says, my Bridget Jones days are over. Because in my mind, I remember Bridget Jones just like going down the fireman's pole and doing foolish things and making an ass of herself. And then I rewatched the movie last year, and I couldn't believe how wrong I was. I mean, she does silly things, but she has such a fundamental sense of her own worth. And I had thought that Mark Darcy Colin Firth, who liked her just as she was, I thought that was such a paltry offering. Like, and at the time I'd seen that movie and I was like, oh, maybe someone will one day love me. And that was such a revelation. And I just thought that was pathetic. And then when I was older, reflecting, and then I rewatched it and I realized it wasn't that he loved her he did, and that was great, but she loved herself exactly as she was. And she doesn't want to compromise. She ends up getting together with Hugh Grant's dashing character. But when he treats her like crap, she's finished with him. She doesn't want to lower herself. And I realized that that sense of her own value was really what was so beautiful about that movie and why it had resonated with me, and that it actually was the kind of story I was writing with Definitely Thriving. So it's not, it's definitely connected, and I wasn't writing against it at all. And I'm so grateful now to look back and realize that I had that movie, because in the environment it came out in 2001, which was just a dreadful time in women and media and pop culture. And so it was really refreshing. And the movie had less about her weight and the sort of self-deprecatingness. I mean, the book's wonderful, but it also, there's some elements of self-loathing that got edited out of the movie, and it was really refreshing. And so, yes, I'm very excited to celebrate the book with that movie, which, I mean, she has so many friends. I love Bridget Jones' friends. They are her family.
I know. That cast of characters are just incredible.
And her cute little apartment. Yeah.
And the blue, what was it, asparagus? What? soup.
The blue
I can't
soup.
remember she was trying to make.
Yeah, she
And
did
they
her
still
best.
ate it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and I'm very excited that this event has come together. It's going to be a good
Last
time.
question before we run out of time is, I think you said you started writing this at the beginning of COVID. So how do you think that like the COVID years and the bleakness of the COVID years sort of seeped into this novel, or either didn't seep into the novel, were like completely pushed to the outside because you were like, I've had enough of COVID?
I started writing it in 2021, so we'd been going through it for some time, and I think I just wanted to write something that would make me happy. And thinking about the characters' close proximity to other characters is maybe something that I was a bit nostalgic for at that point. Like I hadn't been inside a closet with anyone for ages in 2021. And so yeah, thinking about the way that our lives intertwine and overlap, I was missing all that. So that definitely is reflected in the book. And then as COVID went on, everyone, including myself, began to lose our minds a little bit. And some people got very hard to be around, and notions of community became really complicated to deal with. And I think elements of that realism, I mean, the realism isn't in the book. The book is, there's no COVID in my book, but just acknowledging how much friction there is when we're engaging with other people and how that is like a reality that found its way into. People aren't always easy to connect with. And I think Clements comes to sort of accept that in a way that it was a hard road, but, came to realize just because there was friction in a community, that didn't mean we were doing it wrong. Like that's just what people and community are. And I think that is also an underlying message of the book.
Yeah. As someone who's like a chronic people pleaser, there was something so liberating reading about her, because she also just walks into a bookstop store and is just like, well, this is crap, this is how we're going to do it. And it's just like, well, this is how I think we should do it. And so everyone's just like, well, okay, if that's the way you want to do it. And it was just so refreshing.
Yeah, I want to be a bit like that. I think all the protagonists of books I write are people I want to be like a little bit, to have that kind of boldness. Although the older I get, I mean, the more true it's becoming. So
okay, holding up the book again, definitely thriving. We're putting it on our bookshop.org affiliate page. Get it there. Please support Kerry. I truly, there are some literary citizens that I've met who deserve so much support. And I don't feel like they always get it. And Kerry is one of those people. So I'm going to be judging you if you're not getting this book, and if you aren't DMing me to tell me how much you love it. Kerry, thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's author interview. Now, today's author, Summer in England, is indeed her real name. And yes, you are allowed to poke fun at her for this. She holds not one, nay 2 degrees in Shakespeare and performance, and is an actress, author, musical director, and digital content creator. When not blabbering on stage and writing off stage, Summer can be found doing quite literally 17,000 different ADHD motivated projects around her house, watercolor painting, playing the decidedly evil pirate to her kids' morally grey pirate, reading while walking, and not sitting still while watching When Harry Met Sally for the 6th time in one day. It's my pleasure to welcome Summer. Summer, welcome to the show.
Hello, I am so thrilled to be here. This is honestly a dream come true. I'm a huge podcast head, and this podcast in particular was so paramount in the beginning journeys of my writing, so it feels very full circle. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for being on social media. You are one of the people I love to watch when I'm just having a really shitty day, which happens a lot of the time. And you have this effervescence, and it doesn't matter what you're talking about, because for those of you who don't follow Summer, please follow her, because there'll be times that she is speed knitting, like the kind of speed knitting that you imagine only demons can do, while she is like going off on some man who really needs to be taken, in hand and sorted out. And while she'll be painting and all kinds of things, it's insane to watch, but it's the kind of content that we need right now, Summer. So thank you for that.
Of course. Thanks for watching.
And I feel like this book is A warm blanket of you. I feel like if we took you and made you into the fuzziest, warmest blanket that you probably would have knitted yourself, we would come up with this book. I'm holding it up. The Impossible Garden of Clara Thorne. Here we go. Beautiful cover. This is just an arc. Obviously, the finished one will look even better. But this was just an absolute delight. So let's start at the beginning. As we always like to say on the show, there are so many different roads and journeys to publication. How did yours come about?
So mine was sort of like everything else in my life. I kind of fell ass first into it and was like, okay, great. I need to get my feet. Let's do this. Because I started telling stories on TikTok from my journal entries. And I had no intention of ever making it into a book or anything at all. And from there, I had several literary agents reach out to me. And I will be completely honest with you. I come from an acting world, so I knew what the essence of an agent meant. I did not have one. And when I was looking at these messages and these emails, I was like, I don't even know what this is for. I don't know what the process of a literary agent does. And I kept passing on a lot of them because I just had no intention of doing that. And then I had my agent sort of changed my life. She slid into my DMs and the way that she spoke about storytelling really resonated with me because it was the same way I felt about storytelling. Of it wasn't necessarily because a lot of the other agents were like, let's strike while the iron is hot. I think that you have a big following. We can get this. And I was like, I don't really want to write a book because of money.
Right.
I'm as an actor in the creatives. I know that that's a shallow pursuit. So, and my agent was just so earnest, and we met, and I signed with my agent having not written a query letter whatsoever. And when I signed with her, originally what it was for was we were going to sort of work on this like rom-com memoir, which is what I was doing on TikTok. But from there, I sort of knew, okay, I have a deficit in my knowledge. I didn't have imposter syndrome because everybody in the world is like, I did not have time for that. Other people will expect me to fail. I don't need to expect myself to fail. I did know that I was like, great, I just scored a literary agent with a great agency, and I don't know the typical process, which is where this podcast came in. And I learned about query letters and I learned about book proposals. And so that was what my agent and I first worked on together, was sort of putting together a book proposal for this rom-com memoir. But as I was writing that, it was sort of like something unlocked in my soul. And I always had stories and scenes. And as you have seen on my social media, my brain is working 8 million miles per hour. And writing became a way in which so many stories began flooding out of me. And so even as I was writing this other thing, I was dreaming up another book. And that's actually where The Impossible Garden of Clara Thorne was born.
I love all of that. Okay, so firstly, I want to break down something because I don't want our followers to hate you, because here's the thing. What happens is we have people who have been writing for like 10 years, have been querying agents for as long, have never gotten anything. And I don't want them to be like, we already hate summer. So tell us, how long were you doing those TikToks? And I also want to speak a bit here about platform in terms of starting a platform for the sake of enjoyment, as catharsis, as just doing something you enjoy, as opposed to doing it to try and attract a literary agent, because that is not what you were trying to do. So take us through that a bit.
Yeah, at the precipice of beginning social media, it was really just an outlet for me because I am an autistic person who struggles like unmasking in front of people. It just is something that I do. And posting online was sort of a form of really fun storytelling for me. I just liked filming a video. I had no care about engagement or followers. I still don't. And on top of that, though, the TikTok was sort of, my entire life has been storytelling. I went to school for Shakespeare and performance. I've taught at the collegiate and the graduate and undergraduate level, everything from, English comp classes to Shakespearean pedagogy. So TikTok is sort of just the tip of the iceberg for the years I have sort of put into storytelling as a craft. And it's when you brought up, oh no, the followers will hate you. I always feel very, because people are always asking, how did you get into this? What do you do? And I'm like, I'm not going to grift off of my own success. It's not a replicatable situation. I'm not going to be like, and this is how you get a literary agent. And I think one of the reasons, that is always important for me to note is like the social media was always something that I happened to enjoy. If it went away the next day, I would be done. But it was really just sort of fate and timing that I got the agent. And I had been telling stories or posting on TikTok for maybe like a year or two. I would do Hobbit videos and storytelling and such. And that was the chaos that brought me to Clara.
So, for our listeners, Summer has paid her dues. I want us all to be very clear on this. It may not be a traditional route to publication, but it is years of learning storytelling, years of acting, and I love that the TikTok came from just this place of self-expression, of joy, and then it happened to lead to this. Okay, so once we got to the point where you knew which book you were wanting to write, it wasn't your rom-com memoir. How long did that take you from start to finish?
So I began drafting The Impossible Garden November. I did it for the NaNoWriMo. I was like, okay, I'm going to cheat on my project I'm supposed to be working on right now, which is this rom-com memoir. Because the last thing I wanted to do was write about myself. I was like, I really find myself not an interesting subject. I can't imagine writing about myself. And so I started drafting it in November, and then I finished the draft. I was like sort of 75% done with the draft by February, because another publishing company was interested in, because I had posted on social media that I was writing this sort of like cozy situation. And so I wanted to get that draft into them. I believe I got that into them by February. And then we went through edits with them, and it just wasn't the right fit. And then I edited through the summer, and then we went on submission in August, and it went to auction after that.
Wow, that is incredible. So it's the fairy tale that every writer wants. Yeah. Okay, so you've just called your book sort of the cozy, and what I found so interesting about this book, and this is what we're seeing now so much more with genre blends, because it's sweet, it's cozy, it's hella spicy. And I know you've spoken before on socials on your idea of spiciness and other people's idea of spiciness, and I've killed myself laughing as you think it was one of your knitting things where you were like, this is not spicy, this is actually spicy. So I was giggling at that. And we've got fantasy and we've got romance. So this is like, and it's difficult to pull off, really. So tell us how, did your agent even have to pitch this to this publisher who was interested, or were they just like, we really love you, we want this book, whatever the hell it is?
So my agent did get reached out to directly by editors, and the first acquisitions editor that had reached out to her was actually at a different imprint with the publishing company that I ended up landing at with Hachette and Forever. It was a different editor entirely, and I think she worked with children's books. And then it just sort of like editors were reaching out, and then we submitted the book proposal to the editors that had reached out. And then from there, it grew into an auction, which I didn't know about except through your podcast. And so I was on stage, I was performing, like we were opening a show, and I was on stage getting emails back and forth from my agent of like, oh, here's this imprint who's in the auction now. And I was like, I'm not supposed to know about this. I need to fade into anonymity.
Oh my God. And was it based on the proposal alone that they were all busy arguing over the book? Or was it because you said you wrote it from the first draft, okay, and then you walked away from that and then you revised. So what were they looking at this point? Just the proposal, or what the pages you'd written already?
It was proposal and the pages I'd written. The proposal also included, I had like watercolor art in there, and I had marketing ideas. So it was sort of like the proposal was a book package along with me package as well, because I sort of have my own, weird thing about social media and being in the public eye that I can pitch. And then I also sent the pages along with it.
Okay, all right. So that very, very interesting. Okay, so that answers the question, because I was going to be like, are you someone who's always written? I mean, did you used to write for the stage? Did you ever write short stories or anything novel like until this, or no?
No, I only wrote academic papers. My first
Oh, God.
publication was about research between the symbiotic nature of a pregnant actress in the 1800s and the audience. So there was never, and I would doodle here and there. I had always been a storyteller in my family. So instead of like acting out plays, I would be the person sort of tasked with, okay, tell the scary story around the campfire. Insofar as a novel, I was like, I can't be doing that. I'm look at me. I can't write a novel. That's not in my wheelhouse. And but then it was. So
Yeah, I feel like everything's in your wheelhouse. You've just got to figure out like where about in this house it is. Right. So, okay. How much of this was plotted? How much of this was pantsed? When you sat down to write this, you knew exactly where we were going. You were like, shit, I don't know anything. Let's see how this comes to be.
So the two things that were crystal clear in my mind from the precipice of this story was Clara and Hesper, and then a tertiary was Wardy, who is the hedgehog in this. And I have always, and even, I mean, I wrote this book now 2 years ago, and even in drafting my other novels, it is always the same. I'm a very character forward writer.
Mm.
And the only thing I really did was Rebecca Thorne's 5 sentence method, which is an amalgamation of different types of plotting versus pantsing. And it's really just guideposts of at the 25,000 word mark, this beat needs to happen. At the 50,000, this beat needs to happen. And so I just I didn't even have those written out. I just knew pacing wise, once I was getting to the 20 to 25, because I'm a chronic overwriter still. I can linger for a long time. And so that was my main bit, was to just keep myself on track with the pacing. But other than that, I was really just sitting down and every day. I really like discovering and writing through the scenes. And because I had a strong idea of the character, I was never really asking the question of what would make the most sense in the plot next, but rather what would Clara do? What makes the most sense for Clara to be doing next and to be discovering next? And that really helped be my guidepost throughout the entire writing process.
Yeah, I couldn't help but wonder if your experience as an actor helped you shape out Clara, in terms of backstory and childhood and all the rest of it, because she was so fully formed, but not just her, all the other characters. And so, I don't know if acting actually helps with that kind of thing or if it hinders it. What was your experience with that?
Acting helps. I mean, it is a priceless tool in my kit as a writer, because acting, every rehearsal process, you are building stories with people that you do not know. And writing as the author, whether I'm writing from first person POV or not, I am building a story with a reader who does not know these characters. And I don't know these characters. And so in some respects, especially, the supporting characters and such, and what they mean to the main character. And, I would say that it's almost like a one-to-one of the rehearsal process. And even I think one thing that is so great for me as a writer that I'm really grateful for is that acting, it's so transient, it's in the moment. Audiences are going to take away, some people are going to like it, some people are going to hate it. And no matter how much I care or how much I've worked towards this production, at the end of it, it is the act of creating and then letting it be somebody else's story that I think has sort of uniquely prepped me to be like, great, and now the book is other people's now. And I'm really grateful for that experience.
See, that's the part that I hate the most, because I'm an A-type Capricorn control freak. And the part where I have to hand the book over and go, it's no longer mine, it's in the hand of my readership, it's theirs now, that is really, really tough. But I've also heard from actors that they were primed for writing and the rejection, because there's so much more rejection with acting, and you've got to learn to not take it personally. Whereas writers, we all take it very personally.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, well, and it's so because you care so much. And I think in talking and being around actors, we all hope that you really like what we've done. We're not out here being like, yeah, I hope you hate it and had a very middling time. And then writing, it's so, I think the thing, not that I'm necessarily sensitive about, but I think I'm such, because I'm a character person, anybody who doesn't like the character, it's like, oh, that's like a real person in my brain, rather than just like my work or the
It's
book.
like
Because
you don't love my imaginary friend as much as I love my
I
imaginary
know.
friend, right? Yeah, there were these hilarious attempts. So I'm going to read just a few of them that were so funny. They added so much humor. So each chapter begins with an opening line attempt. So one is the squirrel won the war and the wench ruined the carrots. Then she goes to most stories end with a happily ever after, but mine, well, it begins with one. Then it's crosses out. Fire blazed in the sky. Thousands of murky shadows flew overhead, breathing death into the realm. And so each chapter begins with this, here's another one. With a cracked head and a broken heart, our hero found herself rocky, lifeless, and a little hungry with zero soul realizations. So I just really love the humor throughout the book. The banter was so incredibly funny, and that's where an ensemble cast can come in to kind of balance all those things out. I mean, it's the hedgehog, right? What's his name? Warty.
Warty, yes.
I mean,
Yes.
have you had experiences with hedgehogs?
No, not at all. What was weird was I was in between acting contracts. And so I was working at a garden. I was working on a farm. And I thought to myself, it would be so great if I had like a hedgehog companion. I don't know why. All that I knew of hedgehogs was that they were adorable, but they were solitary creatures. And I've always related to that sentiment. And so that first chapter and sort of Clara having because her life is somebody else's hobby. Her hobby is writing and she can't even do that well. That meshed together with Wardy was sort of just, I had this first scene in my brain while I was at the garden. Other than that though, I have yet to see a hedgehog in real life, and I can't wait for that day to happen.
Me too. Hedgehogs and raccoons. I'm living for that. Okay. So some other questions to ask. So this isn't like typical romance. So it's fantasy romance. What we're finding in like typical romance is that authors are being told that the love interest has to be on the page by page 5 or by page 10, or it has to come in as early as possible. Yours, we stretched it out a bit. We got to know her first before we got to that. Was there any pressure put on you by the publisher in terms of we need this early on, or is it a case of what writers are being told isn't necessarily true? You can bring in the love interest later.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the reasons why I'm just so happy to be working with the editors that I am working with is that they saw from the beginning what was important to me and to this story was establishing Clara and establishing the world that she was going to have to leave. And so I did sort of like a semi introduction of the love interest, but I think that this is a fantasy with a romance, but what it's really about is a fantasy and a cozy setting wherein a woman is kind of going through a big self-discovery. She happens to fall in love during that process. And I think that was something that my editors it wasn't even really a conversation. If anything, when we were doing the editing process, it was even more time establishing Clara, even more time spending time with her or, with these other developed characters so that the love felt earned instead of forced. And
Right.
I really, really enjoyed that process.
Yeah, that is amazing when you end up with an editor where you just have that synergy, right? As opposed to constantly trying to write to specs that they're giving you. Okay, so let's talk about creating the town of Moss. Did you, I mean, you said that the original thing had watercolor pictures. Was that of the town? Was it of the characters? What did that look like?
So and the watercolors are actually available. They're in pre-order incentives and such. So there were 2 watercolors that I had, and one was Clara's Cottage, which I just had in my mind. And I wanted to create a place that would break my heart to leave if I were a reader. Sort of very, very much like I think. As anyone, The Lord of the Rings had a huge impact on me as a kid and as an adult, and seeing them leave the Shire was such a trauma
Yeah.
for me. And so I wanted to create this feeling of home and this feeling of never wanting to leave this place because it is so special. And then the secondary watercolor was the town of Dwindle, which is the place that she ends up going, and, redefining what it means to have these feelings of home in multiple places.
Yeah, as you were talking about her cottage, I thought about the scene where she hears the thud and she's in her room, which is essentially the attic, and then she's head down and bum in the air as she's trying to figure out if somebody's broken into the house. And it made me realize how well you write physical comedy. And I feel again that comes from acting, like understanding movement and the intentionality of movement.
Yeah, I mean, acting's a huge part of it. And also I think it's like autism and neurodivergence as superpowers in writing as well, because I understand the world kinesthetically, and I see, I just am seeing bit by bit, and writing was a very similar situation. And I think as a reader, I always like setting. I like understanding where people are living and moving, and that comes echoes from me as an actor and as somebody who my brain processes the way that it processes. And so writing the physical comedy and writing the logistics of a spicy scene.
We're getting to that. We are getting to that. We are building up to that. I first want to the logistics of writing Chasing a Squirrel is hilarious, because after my golden retriever died 2 years ago, I missed going to the park every day. And so I went there and I made friends with all the squirrels. So now I bring them hazelnuts and walnuts, and we've become really good friends on days that they don't bite me. And so I figured out that you can't get tetanus or rabies from squirrels because they've bitten me so many times. And just, I could see myself running through the park trying to get this damn squirrel off my hand who's pissed off because I am not giving him more nuts. And then I was reading your scene, and it was just hilarious how important that physicality is in a scene, because we're always talking about specificity, strong verbs, really making something come alive on the page. And for our listeners, if that's something you struggle with, please, please, please get this book to just see how the action unfolds, and you can imagine every action. Like it feels very cinematic.
Yay, I'm so glad to hear that.
Yeah.
I think that was one thing I really, because I love cozy fantasy, I love the genre, and writing in the genre, I still wanted it to feel visceral. Like when you're reading a really high impact fantasy, high world, high magic, there's such an urgency and viscerality, but what if that was with a squirrel and a tulip bulb? What happens? How can I do that? And so I really enjoyed writing those high stakes scenes for Clara and us as the reader, being like, it's a squirrel. It's a squirrel. You're going after them. And they are, as you say, they're nutty. They can really come after you.
They are predictable little bastards. Okay.
Yeah, they are.
So let's come back to the physicality of writing a sex scene. Okay. Anyone who's listening with their kids in the car, now's the time to, put in your earphones, whatever, you have been warned. So just from hearing you speak online, what is the difference between, say, spicy and smutty? Like, I don't understand the different levels of all of these. So I would like you to take us through this, and then also to discuss the writing of it.
Sure. I mean, great question. And I feel like it's like a sliding scale, like everybody's Goodreads scale. So to me, if there is a book that says that it has spice, I am expecting a sex scene. It's not just going to be like a closed door situation. If there is a book with romance, that could mean spice, or it might be closed door, or, that all of the sensations and the imagination is there, but we don't get to see it on the page. Smut, I would say, is a tier above, wherein if you take out the spice, then you lose a lot of the plot, because the plot is building towards this moment, this smut moment, this spicy moment. Does that make sense?
That makes complete sense. But then I start thinking about, like, Taken by the T-Rex. I mean, what the hell is that? Is that just like Taken by the T-Rex? Okay, I'm assuming that's what, like dinosaur smut?
Yeah, oh, 100%. And then there's Morning Glory Milking Farm, which is Minotaur Smut, which again, it's you don't really have a plot without the spice, which is
Okay.
where you really get. And I see I see a lot of smut featuring monsters or pairings that would otherwise not make sense because there's not a lot of questions about the plot. There's not like gaping plot holes. There's just other gaping holes wherein we're hoping it's filled sometime in the book by these improbable duos, and that's fun.
Big balls. Oh my God. Oh, this is hilarious. Okay, so before we have to go, please give us some advice on writing something that is really spicy and sexy and with physicality, etc., so that the reader is swept along, feels all hot and bothered afterwards, and is not sitting there trying to figure out where this hand came from or whatever. Because I remember my book club once, we actually acted out a scene on a grand piano to see if what this couple was supposed to have done on the grand piano, if they were able to do it. And were like, no, there's no way, considering their heights, etc., that they could have done it. So take us through something where the reader is not even wondering where they are on this grand piano.
Oh, I love this question so much. So, first, I would say one of the biggest tips to writing a spice scene is the build up to it. One is I like to do by the rule of three. So, a miss, a kiss, and then the thing. So, we get that tension. So, when we get there as the reader, there's the it's like, oh my God, thank God, please, please already touch each other. So I write sapphic. I write in the so it is women loving women spice scenes, and in first person POV, knowing where everybody's hands are, where the hands just were, what's slipping in where, making sure that depending on where the two bodies are at, that they could, if their hands are reaching towards somewhere, that they're not doing a twister version of it. I would say the biggest thing is keeping track of the hands and where those are at, and just, tracing whether it's through the hair or through the neck, or, sort of gradually making your way down from tip to the toes, if you will, which is sort of where I kind of lay in regards to writing smut. Is we start with the kiss, we start with the face, and then slowly we inch down the body, and that helps me keep track of where things are.
Right.
And also editors help a lot of just making sure. There was a moment, I still have it screenshotted on my Google Docs, where my editor was like, and how many fingers are inside right now? And I was like, such a good question. Because I just kept saying like, and another, and another, and another. To the point where it was like, wow.
That's one editorial note I have never gotten, and I feel sad about that. I feel really sad. I feel like I need to up my game. I need this kind of editorial note at some point.
Yeah, there's still time. There's still time.
But I like what you said about because I think it's for women especially, so much about the spice in that is psychological, right? It's building up to this thing. What did you say? The kiss, the miss, the
miss, the kiss, and then the spice.
Right. So it's working up to the point where your reader is like, for the love of God, if these two don't start hopping on top of each other, we're going to have problems here. So it's building up to that.
Yeah, I hope the greatest compliment anyone has ever given me when they have read an arc of this book is that they were sexually frustrated. And I was like, thank goodness. Thank goodness. I'm glad. Because I mean, we know our main character is from the beginning. And so sowing that emotion, I think, makes the spice even better, because it's not as much about the spice is wild. There's not T-Rexes kidnapping people in the middle of the night, which of course I think is great. I would laud that as literary amazingness. But anyhow, it's instead like we get this emotional catharsis that we've been waiting for. So any touch at that point, anything is like, oh my God, thank God. It's the hand flex and the Pride and Prejudice. That's what we all want. It's what I want, at least.
And it's also a part of the character development, right? So, we know who this character is at the beginning, and who she then becomes at the end is so different. And that's part of that journey for her as well. So it's not like, well, here she is, la, la, la. Okay, boom, we're going to throw some smut at you. And then she carries on. It's part of all of that.
Yeah. I definitely wanted it to be, that the spice wasn't just forced in, but it definitely it moved the plot ahead, at least internally for Clara, while also being, fun to experience.
Yeah. Yeah, very fun, readers, very fun. Okay, we're at the end of our time. I'm holding up the book again, The Impossible Garden of Clara Thorne. Really, really lovely. Summer, it's been so wonderful chatting with you. This book cover is just absolutely gorgeous. Where did you say we could get those? Where did you say we could get the watercolors from?
So if you pre-order from an indie bookshop in Richmond, Virginia called Fountain Bookstore, your pre-order will come with 2 watercolor renderings that I had of the town of Moss and the town of Dwindle.
And for our listeners, on bookshop.org, you can choose which independent bookstore you would like to benefit from your pre-order. So you can still order through there. What's the name of the bookstore again?
Fountain Bookshop.
Okay, there we go. So let's support that at the same time. Thank you so much for joining us, Summer. This was wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.
Hi, everyone. Today's guest is a former bookstore manager who has worked as a bookseller for Coles, regional marketing manager and events coordinator for Chapters, and as national marketing manager for Indigo. Then moving into the publishing side of the business, he worked in the marketing and publicity departments of publishers such as Stewart House and Scholastic Canada. As a marketing director at Penguin Random House, he managed all Canadian marketing and publicity for DK Publishing, as well as Rough Guides and Alpha Books. Most recently, he was responsible for sales and marketing at Dundon Press as vice president and COO. And now he runs the Idea Shop. It's my pleasure to welcome Chris Houston. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here. So those of you who pay attention will have seen an article by Chris in one of our recent Substacks. It was a wonderful article. We had such excellent feedback on it. And so we wanted to have Chris back on the podcast so that we could ask him your most burning questions. Before we get into all of that, do you want to tell us a bit about the Idea Shop, Chris?
My great love is publicity. It's like playing the lottery, but other people win. And it's a great opportunity. I've worked for big publishing houses. And at one point, I was living with an author. And I'm going to reveal to your entire audience, I am super big on eavesdropping. So listening to the conversations happening in the other room, as my author girlfriend at the time was so frustrated with publicity and tours and marketing and book jackets and blurbs. I was just soaking it in. I was soaking it in. And so I thought it would be great. I love doing positive things and helping authors get their audience, find the audience. It's hard. I know as a bookseller, when that book moves from the front table to the shelf and it's spine out, it's even more challenging to find the book. I want the blue book that was here on the table last Christmas. Anyway, so it's a great use of all of my energy and talents to work with authors and try to find their audience, increase their profile, help them with their manuscripts, social media, whatever they need. Idea Shop.
Amazing. And yeah, you know what? It is so frustrating because as authors, we sit here in our darkened rooms, muttering darkly to our imaginary friends, and we do this for however long, and then we hand it over to someone who will hopefully give us money for it, and then it becomes a product. And then for somebody like me who is a A-type control freak Capricorn, that's when I really start to freak out because I have no or very little control after that. And so our work goes out into the world. And what's terrible is that there have been books out there that are some of the best books I have ever read in my life. And yet I never knew about these books. If it wasn't for one little person who was like, this is my favorite book, I would never have heard about it. So this is why we need people like you to get our books into the right hands and hopefully for the longest time possible. Because like you say, the clock ticks, and I am quite fascinated by the fact. I just want to tell you one thing before we dive in, is that because my latest book, A Most Puzzling Murder, because people have to email for clues and for bonus content, I see who's reading the book in real time and I see who's still emailing. And so this has been my book with the longest longevity. It came out in June, and we are now, this interview is happening in February, and it's still having quite, yeah, I mean, that's quite a long time for a book, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. The things that though ironic is books are pretty much forever. Because way back when I was managing the Kohl's store, there was an exciting moment where we went from big binders full of information, so the younger listeners will not know about this, to computer, very exciting. So I said, before you tear up all the 15, 20 years of info in the binders, just riddle me this. What was our top selling book from 1977 to 1995? And this was great detail work. Number one book, I'll save you time, Catcher in the Rye.
Yeah.
Now, that book had sold more copies than the Stephen Kings and the Donnie Brascos and the Aislinn cartoon books, everything, hands down by such a huge margin. But, it's hiding there in plain sight. There's 3 or 4 copies in the store, but it's just churning away. It's paying for the lights. It's paying for the power. And books have a really long lifespan. DK, we would design a $60 coffee table book called, they're great at titles, History of Science. That book was meant to sell for a minimum of 7 years, if not 10. It was built like your car. It was meant to last. So books should have a much longer lifespan, and you can. Someone buys your new book because they've seen some publicity. That's why it's worth investing in publicity. They go back, they discover the back catalog, the book you won't talk about, these kinds of things. And it's such a big win for an author to build that audience.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's dive into all of this now, because a lot of our supporters keep hearing that the publicity industry has changed, that traditional book publicity models are failing authors. What do you think the biggest drivers of those have been? And then I'm definitely going to ask you what kind of publicity actually moves the needle with book sales.
Great question. Well, I've been on the other side, so I know the biggest problem is time. So one thing, even if you have all the money in the world, you can't buy. The hardest working people, other than authors in publishing, are the publicists. If you see a publicist, buy them a drink, give them a hug. It's never a great day for them. No author ever has said, wow, that was too much publicity. They can't win. They're trying and trying and trying. Now, what's happened is a big publishing house at one time, it would be reasonable to expect 7 to 10 publicists working around the clock. You can imagine the cartoon version of this, pages flying, phones, telexes, faxes. Anyway, now it's half that or less, and they're still publishing as many books. So you have one publicist who has 50 books to promote, and they're going to love your book. So that's great, but they're going to be distracted by 49 other books that they have to do in the course of a year. I mean, they space it out. So there's this dreaded expression that no author ever wants to hear: active publicity period. As the author, your active publicity period is your whole life. As soon as that book comes out, it's there, it's part of, it makes it to Wikipedia, you're done. The active publicity period, though, at a publishing house, they have to move on. Other books are coming. So, if we get a request, great, but we're not going to be actively. So this has really changed in the last few years. The active publicity period, since I've been doing this work, has just shrunk to like 3 months, And 3 months is quite potent. You can get a lot done in there, but everything's speeded up. Social media has sped everything up. So such great questions you sent me ahead of the interview, and I thank you so much. It's like getting the cheat sheet for a test. I know I'm going to pass now. I had just enough time to email 10 publishers and publicists that I truly respect, who are, for the big 5 to the small 5, and ask them very quickly, anonymously, what moves the needles for sales, just to see what I get. Because I got to be honest, I think I know, but this is now serious because I'm talking to you and your listeners and viewers. So I want to make sure I have useful information for the day. So surprisingly, or not so surprisingly, the top 2 things were CBC and a variety of shows, and still the Globe and Mail. Now, that would have been the answer 10 years ago or 15 years ago. Bubbling under is things like TikTok, Instagram, social media. And I know that's a big interest A lot of authors, especially I do a workshop with authors preparing their manuscript for submission. It's very important to have a profile because I was an acquiring editor at Dunder and Press. I acquired a couple I was very particular, acquired a couple of gems. But acquiring now is like this. You get a manuscript, and then we're super lazy people addicted to computers. We turn to the computer and we go, this Bianca person, what's she look like online? What's chugging through their mind is obviously if they have a lot of followers, that's great too. But what am I seeing on this thing? Is this someone I want to have tea with? Good news, you are. She likes raccoons. Okay, but everything else is looking really, really solid. We can promote this person. That Instagram could be framed. Think about it like this. Can we take your Instagram page and put it up on the wall and want to know more? And I think this is overlooked because we're all, especially here in Canada, we're very low key about our achievements. Should we be posting while the Olympics are going on? Yes. Yes, we need us people who thrive on culture and new things. We need the posts from the author. We need to know you're working on something. We may not see it for 2 years. This buildup is very key. When I was a buyer at Chapters, there was a very exciting book in the Penguin Random House catalog called No Logo. And it was by this young lady, Naomi Klein, who lived in Montreal, and I knew her mother, and I was so excited. I was like, yes, we'll do a window for this. And every time the sales rep would come and cross that page out, book's not ready. 3 seasons go by. Every time I'm like, hey, what? By the 3rd season, I'm like, no logo, no logo. I said, great news, it's ready. I'll take 10,000 copies. The buildup is key, and your social media should kind of work the same thing. Even if you don't have a publisher, we want to know that the creatives of the world are working on something and they're making a mess. Please show us messy pictures. I asked one author I was working with, show me a picture of your work area. It looks like an IKEA. It's perfect. There's no way. I'm not even going to show you. Thank God the camera is facing it. Below camera, it's sharks and dirt and dust. But, we want to see this activity and we want to get you ingrained in the minds of readers. This is someone I want to know more from. I've bought books simply because I like the person's social media feed and they seem like this sounds interesting. They've been posting about sanatoriums for 3 years. I'm ready. Give me the book.
Hilarious. So that's what's moving the needle currently for book sales. So then, I must be honest, I think I've pissed somebody off at the CBC because I don't think I've ever been covered by the CBC, ever. So,
great news, you have something to look forward to. You got
and more?
Yeah, well, so the CBC, presumably the CBC would love to answer this question, but since you haven't invited them today, I'll give you my 2 cents of this. The CBC are a bunch of people who literally they're all experts. They're fantastic. They're very passionate about what they do. But someone can come along and say, Bianca, it's Tuesday. Today, now you're working on this show. But I really like I'm a book person. I like the book show. Yeah, I know, but we need you over here in room number 7 working on the Olympics or something. It's very shuffly. So the continuity that, Sheila Rogers was great because she stayed in one place and we knew we could trust her. And when I get a no from Sheila Rogers, I'm just as excited as I am with a yes, because it means a lot of publicity is sending emails. We don't want authors doing this. We don't want Bianca sending emails and not hearing back, because it's going to make it very, very hard to face the blank page the next day, because you're like, why am I doing this? CBC, to get an author on queue, I don't know, 30, 40 emails, 7 producers, 1 producer says, oh, this sounds intriguing. Let me go talk to the other kids on the bus, and it goes around for, and sometimes it's an instant yes. We like that. Anthony Daniels, who's C-3PO in Star Wars, that took him about 6 minutes to say yes to. But if I'm pitching Bianca, I've got to find, Bianca may not be the best person to pitch Bianca. I'm picking on you because you're the only other person who came today. Bianca may not be the ideal person to recognize why she stands out in the crowd. And she may be reluctant to bring up a couple of side stories because you may think they're not relevant, but based on my last email from CBC, who say, well, right now we're really interested in people who have affection for critters. Okay. I know someone, so the next pitch gets that much better. So it's great to have the continuity of doing this for a really long time, because there's certain people, not to freak you out, I know what you like, and I'll get you more of those guests if you answer my email. Even no, just say no, I'm good. Just prove that you're alive and you're answering your emails.
Yeah.
So don't
Man,
feel
I
bad.
don't even talking about their actual shows. I think last May they said 60 Canadian mysteries coming out this summer by Canadians. And I didn't even make that list on their Instagram page. And it was mysteries coming out by Canadians. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah,
I have
yeah,
pissed off at the CBC. I apologize for whatever I did.
you cannot take it personally. For years, I wondered why every, DK Publishing, holiday books galore, big books you'd never buy for yourself. They're too expensive, but you buy them for your nieces and nephews. And, I couldn't understand why the National Post wasn't reviewing them. I'd send them 3 boxes of books. The Globe and Mail, 3 boxes of books just in November. I didn't bother them all year round. Finally, I run into someone back when they had cocktail parties, I said, hey, I'm curious, after 4 years of sending you $9,000 worth of beautiful books, you haven't reviewed a single one. The guy's like, I never got any books, and it didn't even occur to me that the people in the mailroom were using them to keep warm, or, you don't even know. So guaranteed it's not you. It changes on a dime. I've had no one day from one producer on a show and a yes the next day. And, pandemic times, people aren't necessarily, I'd love to have all of the CBC living here in my office. It'd be so easy and less time consuming, but luckily they don't have to live with me. So you got to just keep trying. And even if you don't have a publicist, if you have a handy teenager, niece, nephew, cousin, anyone other than you, just have them send the email, and it never hurts. Oh, she's got people working for her now. We'll be afraid that food court downstairs at the CBC is there's people just, ready to pounce on the producers.
And shout out to Marissa Stapley, who got me on Mail and Guardian. She chose my debut as one of the top 100 books. So, and that really shifted the needle. So thank you to other authors who support other authors as well when it comes to these things. That's so important as well. Okay, so how long before a book pubs should an author already be working with you on their campaign to stand any chance of success?
This is a great question, because often I'm called in like a dramaturge. The book's been out for 3 months. Author is unhappy. Active publicity period has ended. Over to you, Chris. Either the publisher's paying me or the author pays me directly. Fine. But it's a lot harder to work after the book's, everyone's sense of new. Many times the most common email I get is, well, this book came out in November, so why, promoting your book from last June or July. I would have to use my magic to make it seem current, not by lying, but just by saying, well, right now, of course, every human being on earth is reading this kind of book, and this is your spokesmodel for this topic. So why don't you give it a shot? You have to kind of, so ahead of time is best. Especially, great news, I think I've worked for most publishers in Canada now. I play very nice with publishers because I've been in their position. So often I'll have a meeting with the author, with the publisher, and we try to isolate some unique points that are worth capitalizing on. To be honest, publishers won't sign you unless they can see. They've got to explain to many people how this book will sell. So they usually have a pretty good idea. So great. I get a sheet of paper saying, get to work, Chris. And I just double the efforts that they're already expending. But ahead of time is best, especially if there's a chance to affect things like a blurb, cover. Cover is very important. I work with a lot of self-published authors, and, they're so proud. I wrote the book and I took the picture on the cover. It's a great picture, like for Instagram, but it's not necessarily the book cover that's going to fight against, Bianca's book on the shelf. So if I can get involved at that point, even better. Cover designs, blurb. Let's go. You don't want to be chasing your own blurbs. That's painful. Stephen King didn't answer me again. If you're upset about the CBC, imagine if you're trying to get a blurb from John Fowles. He's not answering any of my emails. So when there's a third party involved, it tends to be like, "Hey, buddy, I'm actually really busy. Say something nice, and or write it yourself. Attach my name to it." You get a much more human response because no one wants to upset an author. They're angry and they're vengeful and they hold grudges. So
we
they'd
can
rather.
write about you.
I'm like the guy in the red shirt on Star Trek. I'm not coming back to the ship, so they're just gonna like, I'm done.
But okay. But just going back to our first question, because we said CBC and we said Mail and Guardian, but that's obviously for Canadian writers. We have a lot of US listeners. For them, in terms of moving the needle, who would that be for them?
The number one answer for the US was New York Times. New York Times, New York Times. I have my media list for the New York Times, I think, is about 200 names. Now, I don't know what it is culturally. There's a lot more people in the United States. That explains part of it. It's much harder to get answers from the US. They feel a little bit, especially if it's clear that Canada is asking, although sometimes it has worked in my favor. Television is great. If you asked, one of the questions I asked in my request for information is, what thought lets you sleep well at night regarding publicity? And this is to publicists as well as publishers. And they all said pretty much the same thing. Celebrity book club. If you can get into, as soon as you make that leap into popular culture, and you have to think about why that is. People are looking for things to be curated. You've mentioned like 100 best lists, things like that. If you walk into a bookstore and you don't have a clue, browsing can be a migraine-inducing experience unless you have some idea of what you're looking for. So that America, you want national, they've got great national TV programs, but you want someone really breaking through. You want to be, on a show that like people are watching and they're not expecting a book. If you tell people, hey, let's go watch the book show on TV, you and I will be like all over it, but our cool friends will be like, actually, the voice is on, So it's this idea that it's been curated by Reese Witherspoon or Oprah, or someone has said, hey, I read this and it's really good. That's very compelling. That's the problem with publicity is I read every book I promote and I have to be able to stand by it and say, actually, this is really good. And the good news is I like to read, I like books, and I like a lot of different things. So it works out. But New York Times, TV, NPR, kind of like their CBC. Yeah. I got one book on PBS, which was great because PBS, they're immune to this thing I said about how great Zoom is because you could do interviews. They want the author in person, sitting still, don't move, sir, madam, don't touch the palm tree, and we're going to talk for 2 hours. We're not editing, and you just tell us what you're thinking. That really lets you, if you're a kind of literary type person, PBS and NPR are perfect.
Okay, perfect. So we did get that answer for our American friends. Okay, so I've seen authors want to hire a publicist and just be like, okay, I'm paying you, you do this now, and I'm not going to do anything. You need to go out and make my book a success. Now, obviously, how can you work with the author in a way that makes it a very successful partnership?
Well, it's a bit like those reality shows where the person is jumping off a bridge. I've never done this before. And then the person pushes them off the bridge in a nice way. There's a bungee attached. Just wanted to be clear. So we need authors who are going to do the work. Now, some authors just can't wait to get out there. Please give me all the interviews that you can. And actually, to be fair, some want the promotion, but they're much more comfortable, like, sitting at their desk. Maybe we could do a Zoom. Maybe it's an email interview, things like that. But there's going to be requests on their time and energy. Most of the time we work this out ahead of time. I'll ask, Bianca's good mornings. She likes 9 to 12. Rest of the time she's busy. Tuesdays and Wednesdays. And we just decide you're going to do Tuesdays and Wednesdays. If it's the CBC or the New York Times or, if Reese Witherspoon is calling, all bets are off. But generally we stick to a bit of a plan and you have to trust me. Sometimes it'll be like, well, I don't think this is a great show. I said, I'm going to use the not great show that you don't like, and I'm going to get you a bigger show because I'm going to send them the link and say, so it all kind of works in tandem. And so I'm like the person at the top of the mast saying, iceberg on the left, let's go right. And you have to be willing. If you're hoping to just sort of write a check and take 3 months and work on your next book, I could do a couple things with that, but it's better if you're going to be actively engaged and you're going to be busting to do something because you've submitted your manuscript. There's a terrible period where authors seem to really lose their mojo is after the manuscript and all the edits are done, there's like 3 to 6 to 8 months of like waiting. You can't really focus on the next book. What's happening with this one? They changed the jacket. That's a great time to get me involved. I keep you company and I can help interact. Oh, I don't like the new cover. Okay, let me send the email that goes with that.
Yeah, yeah. And loving your cover is so important, and it is such an awkward conversation to have because I find publishers will now, especially with Zoom, they'll have you on a Zoom with the editor and people in marketing and publicity and everything, and they'll be like, "We think we have the best cover and we all love it and we're about to show you." And then they flash it on screen and you're like, what the hell is that thing? And you're like trying to smile, but your eye starts twitching. So yeah, it is important to have people on your side who could be like, that's a nice first version, but
Oh, yes, you've done this before.
yeah, that's great first version.
Great start,
Great start, but let's move on from there. Okay, we don't have much time, so I've got to dive in more here, Chris. So some people say platform doesn't matter. Others say it's essential. So what can an author be doing now while they're still writing their book that might make your job easier working with them down the line?
Get that social media together, start having those conversations. If you're looking for work, the number one way to get a job is to tell people you're looking for work. Seems obvious. I've ruined an entire KPMG weekend giving that away. But people need to know you're working on a book. They'll say things like, oh, let me know if you need a hand, or I know someone who could do a great blurb. You don't know them, but I do. Like, you have to sort of let people know. So platform, get those sanitarium posts up there, ahead of the book. So people go, actually, this person's been on this for a while. We want to know research has been done. We want to know you're getting your hands dirty. And we kind of like being, most of us book nerds, we like being teased a little bit about, oh, what's the next one? Especially if you've got people who've already, my wife will often say to me, well, why are you buying another book? You have a book by that author. And she's totally missing the point. I want all the Bianca books, but it's the teasing about what's coming next. Well, this one's going to be different because there's clues, or whatever. Even if you're not revealing much, it keeps the interest going. You're fanning a little flame. And that's what you do while you're working on the book. And that crazy time, that 6 months where you have nothing going on and you're obsessing. Maybe I'm going to change this. Maybe it should be third person, every character.
Yeah.
Those terrible thoughts. Let's apply that exact same manic, crazy Capricorn energy. Let's put it into some social media posts, nothing heinous. I will advise that the rule for social media that will never steer you wrong is enthusiasm. Even if you're enthusiastic about the wrong thing, people will go, well, at least she has a heart and it's beating still, So these are the kinds of things to do during that time. The platform is build your brand, however you feel comfortable, or call me, but build your brand and get it solid. So when that book comes out, everything kind of clicks into place. Like, oh goodness, she's been talking about this for 2 years. I better buy her book.
Yeah. Geez, it does. And it feels like an eternity as well. Okay. So 2 more questions. So many authors right now feel like the world is a dumpster fire. I mean, you just look at the news every day and you want to weep, and it's just awful. And they are on social media and they're trying to promote this book, and they say, I feel so bad trying to promote my book when there are wars and bad things are happening in the world. What do you say to that?
I'm going to use the genius of Lorne Michaels, the producer of Saturday Night Live. After 9/11, he had an enormous problem of, we have a show scheduled. It's terrible, world-changing events, tragedy on the largest scale. What do we do? And just like all of us, he crowdsourced answers, and he talked to different people and performers and artists. And they said, you got it. We need this right now more than ever, more than before this terrible incident. We need stuff that takes our minds off it, or lets us like laugh at life, or just help us get through this. And that's what books and art and music and so an author having an extremely bad day can be the most fun post I read all day, because Well, one I read the other day, I just burnt 76 pages of my manuscript, and I'm like, well, guaranteed it's going to be better. And it actually inspires me. Like I have a whole thought process because you're the creatives and you're not properly compensated for what you're doing, of course, but you're doing it. You're driven people. I know because I spent time with some of you, and this is important to share. So even if you're having the worst day, one author, posted a picture of the CN Tower in fog without any comments, but that was told me a lot about whether or not to show up that day and ask for money. Like it's clearly he's not having a good day. The next day was better. And then you can look back and go, wow, when I look at my own posts, I'm a moody sort of character, aren't I? So it's very important to keep it going. Even if you don't be put off. What's happening over there is happening over there. This is your own verse. The Bianca verse is yours to own. Whatever author is working, please share.
Okay, perfect. And last question, why is it worth paying for a publicist in both the short term and the long term?
The great news about publicity is it helps build you and your brand and who you are. And it helps get a narrative out there that because you're paying me to help is kind of tailored to your wishes. A publisher can do that too, but they do have to move on. Like the publisher can only stay in business. So we have a period of time together where when we're done, more people will know about your book. More people will know about you. I do have some curatorial skills. I think people really need to know about this part of your background. Were you in a punk rock group produced by Billy Bragg in the 90s? That could be kind of interesting for the people at Q, even though that's not what you're talking about now. So it really helps build your brand, and it is an investment. So when you go to get your next book deal, I understand publicity. Fortunately, I do it for free if I could, but it costs money. But it's an investment towards your entire career because someone's going to go back and say, well, look what happened for this person's other last book. An agent or even an author could say, well, that was that publisher. Imagine what you could do. Or look at all the time and money I put in and look at where I got. I'd love to have even more of an advance, even more support, even more publicity time, because I think we could really rock this out. So you're at a better starting point. You're at a place where you could do even more. So it's an investment for the future as much as keeping your book on the front table of the store as long as possible.
Okay, so for our listeners who want to be in touch with you, where can they reach you? Where should they follow you? How do they find you?
Well, I'm on Instagram, Idea Shop Canada. It's the ideashop.ca, and it's very easy to remember my email, chris@theideashop.ca. It's like, or, email you directly.
And you said earlier that you also work with indie authors as well. What, hybrid publishers, pretty much all authors.
It's a full range, and it's quite interesting because the opportunities have never been richer for everybody because the walls have come down and it's a lot easier for people to access what they're looking for. They just need to find it and have someone say, this is really good, or wow, I didn't know that was going to have that in it. Let's buy it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us, Chris. Really, really appreciate it. For our listeners, we will link to Chris's details in the show notes, so you don't have to be writing those all down. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks so much. Nice to be here.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you'll join us for next week's show. In the meantime, keep at it. Remember, it just takes one yes.